Hello everyone, welcome back to the class. As I mentioned last Friday, for this week we are going to read more Chinese recipe on how to make Chinese food and also watch more video on making Chinese food, which I will call the modern day Chinese recipe. And I hope this will be another fun week for both your eyes and your appetites. Okay, so the book we are going to read for Monday is called Chinese Gastronomy, and in this video, I'm going to do an introduction on this specific book and also its authors, and mention some interesting questions for you to think about. So let's first turn to its author. So this book, Chinese Gastronomy, is written by Lin Cuifeng and Lin Xiangru. You may be unfamiliar with these two names, but they are famous because they are wife and daughter of a very famous modern-day Chinese writer, Lin Yutang, who lived from 1895 to 1976. And this is a picture of them. So on the left, it is Lin Cuifeng, Lin Yutang's wife, and on the right, that is Lin Yutang. So who is Lin Yutang? He basically active in the Republican period, which is after 1911. And that is a time marker for, if we're talking about Chinese history, that is time marker when we consider China is entering a modern age. So basically everything is kind of moving away from the classical time and be close and very similar to our contemporary days. And Lin Yutang is, because he is actually living in that transitional period, so he received a mixture of both modern education and classical education. So basically, he studied Chinese classics and also received the Western modern education like us today. He also studied abroad, like at Harvard, and later taught English in the Peking University. So you can see his idea and lifestyle is greatly influenced by the Western culture. And also, Lin Yutang is an author in English. So he actually writes in both English and Chinese. Some very famous book of him, like My Country and My People, and The Importance of Life. This one is very interesting one because in this book, Lin Yutang kind of describe his ideal life and teach you a little bit how to live a ascetic life. And also he is a very famous translator. Some of the important book he translate from classical Chinese to English includes 6 chapters of A Floating Life. This is a very interesting book. It's about a very devoted Chinese couple living in the Qing dynasty, a very interesting book. And also he introduced some Chinese classics as well into English, like Confucius, Lao Tzu, Su Dongpo, Zhang Dai, a lot of them. Like the Zhang Dai we have read a little bit in the previous weeks. So you can see he sort of continues that line of thinking from the classical Chinese to the late imperial time when Zhang Dai was active and when Yuan Mei was active, and continues that to the modern day China. And one fun fact is that this book, Chinese Gastronomy, is also written in English, originally written in English. So it makes it very different from the way of eating we have read last week, because that book is originally written in Chinese and classical Chinese. So you can see the target audience of these two books are very different. For the way of eating, of course, that's target to Chinese, target to people living in contemporary time with Yuan Mei, and people who can read classical Chinese, so educated Chinese people at that time. But this book, Chinese Gastronomy, because it is written in English, so its target audience is the people who speak English and the people who may not know that much about Chinese cuisine. So the idea about how to introduce Chinese cuisine is very much different based on their different target audience. So I think that's a very interesting fact you should keep in mind when reading this book. And now let's turn to the author Lin Cuifeng and Lin Xiangru. This is a picture I found, actually Lin Cuifeng with their three daughters, the three daughters between Lin Cuifeng and Lin Yutang. Actually Lin Cuifeng is the third daughter, the youngest daughter, so should be the one in the back of the picture. So Lin Cuifeng is actually born in a wealthy family in the Xiamen, Fujian, so the southern part of China. And one very interesting thing is that he wins supposedly it is said he wins the heart of Lin Yutang using his cooking techniques. I think the anecdote says one day Lin Yutang went to Lin Cuifeng's father's house and have a very delicious, very fantastic dinner made by Lin Cuifeng. And after that, Lin Yutang made up his mind he need to have this woman as his wife. So that kind of a romanticized love story is centered on Chinese food. And I think that's very interesting because the way of eating written by Yuan Mei, but as I said in the lecture, Yuan Mei, he himself didn't cook. So he basically only observed and had a theory by this observation of how to cooking and how to make delicious food. But Lin Cuifeng herself is a cook. So this book is based on actual experience of a cook. So I think that standpoint of the two different authors also made the book differently. And you should keep that in mind when reading the book. So Lin Xiangru is the third daughter of Lin Cuifeng. And she is actually a chemist. She studied in Harvard once and later became a biochemist at Queen Mary Hospital in Hong Kong. I think this standpoint is also very interesting because if you're thinking about cooking, and especially the technical part of cooking, I think it has some very similar parts with doing chemistry, how the ingredients activate with each other and how the flavor is active by different elements. All these kind of things is also belongs to the realm of the chemist. So it's very interesting to see a cook and a chemist work together, collaborate to write this book. So actually, basically, they write three books, or I would say three versions of the sort of the similar book from 1960s to 1970s. The three books, the first one is Secrets of Chinese Cooking. The second one is Cooking with the Chinese Flavor. And the third one is Chinese Gastronomy, the one we are going to read. The first two books have a lot of overlaps with the Chinese gastronomy. So they basically edited and add more things into the book for each version and change a different title. So one thing very interesting is when you're looking at the design of the cover, especially for the first and the second book. So it's basically the dominant color is red. And they will put like in the first Secret of Chinese Cooking, they'll put the symbolize the very classic Chinese symbol in the center of the book. And in the second book, you'll see they picture the traditional way of the tableware, traditional tableware of Chinese eating on the cover. So I think you can think about it, why they use such a cover and who they want to attract. And especially if you're thinking about in Crazy Rich Asians, Rachel's mother said red is a lucky color in Chinese tradition. And why the red is used here and how it is used and what kind of target audience it wants to appeal to, all these are very interesting questions. We can have a discussion in the class. And a little bit about the structure of the book. So first, the first chapter is about Asian cuisine. The second is flavor. The third is texture. And the fourth is regional cooking. And later, curiosities. Curiosities is about all these exotic or strange way of cooking, which is very different from like French cooking or American food. So try to, especially talking about all these things, make Chinese cooking or Chinese cuisine special. And then plain cooking is talking about the daily cuisine Chinese will have. And then some classic cuisine, and later a gastronomic calendar. This chapter is interesting in the way that it kind of follows our discussion in the previous weeks when we're talking about you need to eat certain food at a certain time, or at a certain occasion you have a certain food. Like for the birthday, traditionally you need to eat long noodles, all these kind of occasionalized or seasonalized cuisine in Chinese tradition. And one more thing very interesting is that for this book, it has an appendix which includes a glossary of cooking methods and table of equivalents. So not only it kind of try to explain to you the way in English, the way of Chinese cooking in English, but also it kind of make it appeal to the English readers by laid out very clearly how the equivalents will be. Like 1 cup in the Chinese recipe should be called blah blah blah, that kind of things. So really you can use this book as a actual recipe to make an accurate recreation of certain dishes. So I think this contents of the book is very interesting in a way. First, it kind of started with the history, started with the Chinese Asian cuisine that kind of anchor the whole book in the long tradition of culture. And then it kind of moves on to talking about a specific perspective of the cuisine, like flavor or texture or regional cooking. And also, not only it provides a narrative about different parts, but also within that narrative, you will see it provides some sample kind of a recipe of that specific parts. I assigned you to read chapter 2 and chapter 3, the flavor and texture. So while reading the book, you'll see not only did the author have its own argument and some knowledge he wants to share, but also he will provide some interesting actual recipe. So I think this is also a very different from the way of eating, which Yuan Mei just laid out the principle and the narrative first, and then go direct to recipe after recipe. And for Chinese gastronomy, it's almost like a mix. And some question for you to think about. So first one, what is Chinese taste? I think we've been talking about Chinese food culture, Chinese food for 10 weeks for now. And now you can get an idea about what is Chinese food or what is Chinese taste in your mind. But especially for this book, after reading this book, do you have any new inspiration about what can be called Chinese taste? And then the second question is, what is true taste? The true taste appears again and again in The Way of Eating by Yuan Mei, but also reappear in this book as well. So what is the idea, why the idea of true taste is so important, and what can be called true taste? And one more question is the connection with literary taste from the previous dynasties, such as Zhang Dai and Yuan Mei. So Zhang Dai's taste, if you still remember the crab meeting and the specific idea about different water from different region, and also Yuan Mei's idea about taste, how these kind of provide some resources for Lin Xiangru and Lin Cuifeng to write this recipe. Do you see any connection between them? And the preference for natural ingredients and plain flavor, does this kind of a inheritance from previous dynasties? And one more thing interesting is a discussion about, I would say, very specific point about Chinese taste or Chinese cuisine is first, sweet natural taste or xian, and second, tender, and third, crispy. So all these things I think are described in the third chapter texture. And when reading that, please pay attention to this specific term and thinking about how that connected to Yuan Mei's idea or maybe Zhang Dai's idea as well. Or maybe other kind of your idea about Chinese food in general. And for this book, also thinking about it's written in English and target at English readers, does it has any kind of own innovations about its own understanding of Chinese food and representation about Chinese food? Okay, so that's my brief introduction about the book and its author. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to leave a comments down below, and I will see you on Wednesday. Okay, bye.